you're looking at 4 decades of game design sitting in front of you.
That helped.
So, brief introduction. David Crane. I worked at Atari in 1977 with Nolan Bushnell. Spun out of Atari to form Activision with 3 of my buddies in 1979, and been making games continuously since 1977, and met these guys in the next few years as the time went on through Activision. It was really Activision where we all got together. So that's me. I've published about 100 games. Don't ask me what they are, because every time I try to come up with a list, I come up short. I mean, I ask people, can you name the last 100 books you read? You know, so 40 years of game design, you forget something. John.
My name is John Van Ryzin. I'm a big fan of a famous game called Hero. I worked on a lot of different consoles, PCs, web games, mobile games, handheld games. Pretty much.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm an alcoholic. Oh, sorry. What day is it? Garry Kitchen. I worked with Garry Kitchen, my brother, from about 1980 in a small software company that did Apple software. At the same time, Garry back engineered the Atari and wrote Space Jockey and Donkey Kong. And we joined up with Activision in 1982. With John Van Ryzin, Garry, and myself, and we've pretty much all been working together ever since. I've done a number of Atari games, went on to produce about 100 games at other companies, and I've personally written, I guess, about 20 titles or so, and still love making games.
Hi, Garry Kitchen. I have laryngitis. So you'll be hearing less from me on this talk. Started in electronic toys, did Bank Shot and Wildfire for Parker Brothers, handhelds in the late 70s that worked with 4-bit microprocessors. Met Dave in 82, actually we all did, because John and Dan and I were all working together when we split off from the company we were working with. Met Dave in 82, pretty much have worked consistently with him, except for 1 or 2 small gaps, but really about 45 years. And we are at this show primarily because we have a new company, Audacity Games, which is almost, I guess, 4 years old now. And it's Audacity Games because no one else would have the audacity to start a company to make games for 45, 50-year-old game platform. So that's why it's Audacity, new original Atari games. And I will hand it back.
Yeah, we would come and speak at these shows, and we would like to tell stories about some of the games we made. We actually rely a lot on you guys to say, ask questions about what games you're interested in, because there's a story behind every game we did, and we wouldn't even know where to start. But almost invariably, people would ask, we loved your games in the 1980s, and could you please make us some brand new games for the Atari 2600? And my first reaction was always almost violent. You know how hard it is. I mean, this is the hardest console in the world ever to work on. And yet we love it, it's our favorite, largely because it's so hard that when you do something really cool, it's very rewarding to have achieved a great game. But there's nothing from the 80s out there. We had to create a brand new injection molded tool to make plastic for our games. We've got labels and boxes and manuals, and all of those things had to be rethought of, remade, remastered. so that we could bring you kind of what we try to do is we want to recapture that Christmas morning 1982 when you opened up Pitfall and lit the Christmas tree. So that's what we do. It's a beautiful physical cartridge, manual, label, box, all of those things that you remember from the 80s. And then for fun, we've added some new technology. At the end of the game, it puts up a QR code on the Atari 2600 screen. And I originally said that working on the 2600 is very hard. That was the hardest thing I've ever done on an Atari 2600 screen, is figuring out how to make a QR code on the 2600 screen. John, you don't know this, but probably not, but a QR code requires calculating a 22-term polynomial. Yeah, you looked at my code. Okay. It's insane.
It reminded me of the Red in 3D.
Exactly.
6502.
Yeah, I mean, if you could actually download a free JavaScript plugin to make a QR code, if that's all you want to do, but try to do that on an 8-bit microprocessor with 128 bytes of RAM, and you'll see what I was doing. And then put it on a display that's not designed to play Tank, and put a QR code on it. But anyway, so we've added some technology. It makes it look like we've attached the Atari 2600 to the internet, which didn't actually do, but it lets you download. It automatically submits your high score to our global high score.
Yeah, and then the best part is you can get a patch. Like they gave out patches at Activision. You can take a photograph of a game, your high score, and you can get a patch sent to you. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, in the old days, you would take a Polaroid of your TV screen and mail it in, and we had 6 people in customer service working full time, answering as many as 14,000 letters a week of people sending in pictures of their screens, and we'd send out the patches. So if we're going to recreate the 1980s, we had to recreate the patches. So you can actually earn a patch. We don't have 6 customer service people doing it full time, but it puts it into the score or the store tab of our website, and for $2 shipping and handling, you can get your patch there. So,
go ahead, Garry.
$2? That's outrageous.
It's outrageous.
Did you ever read letters from people who played your games that wrote letters to Activision?
We were given redacted because a lot of people, in fact, most of them said, you should make a game called Dragster or something, and we were not allowed to be infected by ideas from the outside, because then somebody would come back and say, wait a minute, that was my idea and you guys made it. So they would select letters, and we get to read those. I think the most famous in my experience was the letter we got on Laser Blast from a kid who had received 1,000,000 points in Laser Blast. Now, if you do that in level 1, it takes 5.5 hours of shoot. You got this timing that you end up creating. So he spent 5.5 hours earning 1,000,000 points. And one of the things that I put into the game that I kind of regretted when I got this letter was, with Laser Blast, you could die in the first 3 seconds, or you could play for 5.5 hours. So I put in, I think it was the first time ever, I put in a joystick reset. So basically, after the game, if you hit the joystick to the right, it would reset. Because I was too lazy to reach up and flip reset on the controller on the console, right? Anyway, so the kid scores 1,000,000 points, and he's so exhausted, he drops the controller on the coffee table, and it resets the game. So we received a letter from this child who said, I scored 1,000,000 points, and let me explain what happened. He said, I dropped it and it reset. And then there was a note on the thing from his mother who said, I was in the room, I saw it, got 6 exclamation points.
Also a note from his therapist.
And the letter was actually tear stain. So yeah, he got his patch.
No, I was going to say a rule's a rule. You know, I mean, come on.
Right.
They only sent me one letter, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
So it was some kid in South America who played Hero all the way till the end. And somebody put in the manual, I did, and somebody asked me what happens at the end of the game. I said, not much, it's just put 6 exclamation points for the score, right? And somebody in the manual says there's something special happens if you get to the end. And so this kid did it, and he was furious.
Yeah.
Like, there was no reward because it was just 6 exclamation points.
Well, the fun thing was, there were 14,000 letters a week, and you could count the number of negative letters we got on one hand, like the one that John's talking about. There was another kid. Does anybody remember Bob Whitehead's game, Boxing? It's a top view and side view, and it's actually a really fun game to play. And the kid said, you know, the boxers look like lobsters. And he had a tirade in this letter of all these negative things. And a week later, we got a retraction. And the same kid wrote back and he said, I'm sorry for all those negative comments. My mother had just restricted me to my room and taken away my Atari 2600, and I was really mad, so I wrote this letter. So we had, you know, the one John's talking about, we had this one, but that one got retracted. And otherwise, you know, people were really happy with our games back then.
How many people know Hero? Game Hero? Yeah, I mean,
One of the best in the world.
a lot of people say it's the best game ever done on the Atari, and I certainly do not disagree. I mean, our friend Metal Jesus, if you know him, it is by far his favorite game. Absolutely incredible. And John doesn't come to many shows. We were lucky to get him to come to this one, so I think we should let him know how much we like you.
John is showing at our booth Alien Abduction, which is a spiritual successor to Hero, which John wrote for us last year.
Hero in Space.
Hero in Space, that's correct. And if you don't know our other titles, Gary and Dave have Circus Convoy, which is a very cool, hundreds of screens, multi-mini-game adventure, where you collect circus props and you have to solve the mystery of who sabotaged all the trucks carrying the circus across the country. We also have David's newest game, Rescue from Poseidon's Gate, which is a very cool underwater game. It's probably the largest character sprite you'll ever see on the machine. It's a diver with a Mark V helmet, and he's going down to the ocean depths, across to basically where every screen is a mini game to try to get to a sunken submersible, fight off some sharks, and then make his way back to the ship. But every screen that was a mini game now plays completely different. And then you get back to the ship anchor, you make your way up to the surface, and you'll earn a couple of patches. And then I have a game called Casey's Gold, which is a game with kind of a spiritual successor to Gary's famous Keystone Keeper game. And this is Keystone Kelly's cousin from the old country called Casey O'Kelly. And he is riding a train through the desert, visiting ghost mines, ghost towns and abandoned mines, and that plays like a platformer. So after the talk, please come by our table and feel free to play the games and take a look.
Was Casey O'Kelly, was that the cousin that came in when Keystone Kelly was testifying in front of Congress?
That's correct.
And
yes.
they said, who's that man sitting there?
Yes, yeah, as a matter of fact, I think right out of the Godfather movie, it was, I think Keystone Kelly was up on the stand.
Right.
And they said, I'm sorry, who's that person next to Michael Corleone? And it was Casey O'Kelly.
Casey O'Kelly, that's
yeah,
right.
came by to visit, just to
These
support.
guys are nuts with the Godfather.
Sorry, we like the Godfather. Take the cartridge, leave the gun.
John. So anyway, yeah, I mean, between us, we've been involved in 200 or 300 games. as a group with multiple publishers, with different companies. I know that my games have been on 25 different consoles or systems. I've written in more than 20 different computer programming languages. Every time a new console would come out, a lot of people didn't think about this, but you know, we're working on the 2600 and then the Intellivision comes out. We had to start from scratch, reverse engineer the Intellivision, make a manual for it, make a development system for it, start making tools like compressors, decompressors for the data, sound effects tools, music tools. There's like years of work that has to be, or man years anyway, of work that has to be done just before you see the first game come out on these new consoles. And we did the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the
NES.
it was before the NES. It seems like there was one or two, but then the NES,
5200.
Commodore 64, Super Nintendo, Atari 800, Atari 400. Yeah,
MSX.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And anyway, so all of these new consoles, every time a new
7800.
there you go.
Yeah.
5200.
There you go. Every time a new console came out, it was a whole lot of work for us just to make the first game on it.
And we would have done games on the 5200, but the joystick was so bad that we couldn't do it. And we're all working on new games right now, all four of us. And we can't tell you anything about them. But we do want you to know we are working on them.
But they're cool. And yeah, we hope some will come out soon.
Yes.
Or not.
Yeah.
Well, as Gary likes to say, this is kind of a retirement business for us, because when you've been making games for 50 years, what else do you do? We don't go golfing, you know, whatever. We just sit down at the computer and make more games. But his big deal is nobody tells us when they're due. So we will make the games and keep working on them until they're good and great. And
That was the Activision, right?
we tried to do that with Activision. I mean, when we founded Activision, there were a number of things. Founding principles were that a game designer should get credit for a creative piece of work. At Atari, you were nameless back then. That's why Warren Robinette put his name in Adventure, because Atari wouldn't put his name on the outside of the box. The four of us who started Activision had a different philosophy. So we left Atari and formed a company so that we could put our names on the outside of the box. But at Activision, what we tried to do is we handpicked our CEO, and he would come back and he said, "Look, guys, I know you're trying to make great games and you're going to take as long as it takes to make it, but I need 3 games out for Christmas. And I don't care which ones they are." But he kind of like got us to step up and said, "Okay, my game will be done by Christmas, I guarantee it." And he said, "I'll count on that." So instead of the marketing people saying your deadline is X, they asked us, "I got to have a game. Can you guys commit to a deadline?"
When they hired us, they told us, just tell us when the game's good.
Well, that's because you were the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. I mean, the first 4 of us were really stuck having to build the company from nowhere. The other thing was the Atari 2600 was made by Atari to make the ability to sell their arcade hits in the home. Atari was an arcade company. Pong was an arcade game long before it was a home game. And so they made the Atari 2600 hardware really to sell their arcade games. They made it capable of making Tank, which was their, Combat is the name of the cartridge, Tank was the name of the arcade game, and their Pong. They wanted to be able to sell home versions of Tank and Pong. And that's really what the hardware was designed to. And we've made, there have been thousands of games made since then using the same hardware. And we did that by just figuring out new tricks, ways to use the hardware in ways that the designer really never intended. But when we started Activision, we didn't own a bunch of arcade hits. So every game that we created at Activision had to be original content. Sit down with a blank sheet of paper and come up with a game. And it turns out we had skill at doing it, but it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, if you sit down and say, I'm going to think of a game, it takes a lot of effort. But, so we didn't know how many games were going to come out of the pipeline. So I said, you guys go to it, do your thing, and please let us know when they're done.
Does anybody have a particular game that they wonder about and they have a specific question about the game? Since we have all of us up here.
One up there.
Yeah, I go back to the 80s, but I didn't have an Atari. I had an Intellivision.
Could you leave, please?
You and George Plimpton, please leave the room.
Go ahead.
But actually, ironically enough, one of my first games was Pitfall. So my question is, what inspired Pitfall?
Well, Pitfall really comes from an era before there were human characters in games. Back then, there were jet planes and tanks and all these, non-human objects. And I was just determined to put a human figure in a video game that was realistic and moved well and, could become an avatar in an adventure game for you. And I would walk around the lab sketching my leg positions for walking and running and trying to figure out an animation, remembering that the Atari 2600 had an 8-pixel wide object. So how do you make a human-looking figure in 8 pixels? It took a lot of effort, and I finally did it. Actually, I failed. And then I went off and did another game, and then I went back to it, and went back to it, and finally I said, all right, I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to make Pitfall, or I'm going to make a game using my little running man. Took a blank sheet of paper, drew a stick figure on it, and said, there's my little running man. Where is he running? I drew 2 lines. It's the path, so he's running on a path. Where's the path? I drew some trees, called the jungle, because Indiana Jones was out, so jungle's a good place to have an adventure. Then I added some enemies, the rolling logs, the things that would hurt you, the pits and the alligators. And you basically, when you're building a game like this, it's an iterative process. You say, I think I need something for an enemy, so I create some enemies, look at them. The hardest thing to do is make it look realistic in 8 bits. So quite often you would draw something, and you'd say, all right, this is going to be, a flower. And so you'd ask the people in the lab, I said, look at this, what is it? And they'd say, I don't know, is that a hat?
Machine gun.
And you would
know it's a flower.
And when you finally got something that everybody could look at and figure out what it was, you would put that in the game. So you're not really designing the game based on what you want in the game, you're designing the game based on what was recognizable at first glance. There was a Star Trek episode that has something like that. Remember there was a salt monster, this person who suckers and whatever, and it was in the script that the yeoman had to be delivering food to Kirk on a tray, and there was salt on the tray. And so since it was in the script, they had the prop master go out and say, find me a 23rd century salt shaker, right? And they found all these futuristic-looking things from Beverly Hills boutiques and such, and they brought them all over, and they had the same problem. They looked at it, and Roddenberry said, I would have to put a line in the script of pass me the salt, so that you would know that this is a salt shaker, for me to do this. So instead, they went down to the commissary, they got a salt shaker out of the commissary, and put it on the yeoman's, tray. Very similar thing. If you have to explain what the thing is, you lose the effect. Anyway, so we do these 8-bit objects, and the scorpion actually came out beautiful. The alligator in 8 bits is truly amazing. It looks like an alligator head. But anyway.
Well, the man had normal proportions, like the other people would make these squatty little guys, like Mario.
Well, that was actually a cultural difference between the U.S. and Japan. I mean, I did a game called Rescue of Princess Blobette.
Yeah.
And a company took it into Japan and changed it, and they changed the guy from the guy that I had into a little squat Mario-looking guy, and because that was what people expected in Japanese games.
Well, I think Pitfall, though, was the first.
Easier to draw, too.
Pitfall, I think, was the first man in a video game.
Not absolutely the first.
I'm saying like
And Donkey Kong point out.
Donkey Kong point out.
anatomically correct
Yeah.
guy.
Right.
That was unique.
Yeah.
It was a very good, animation for a little guy, particularly in 8 bits.
And it worked that he was tall, so he stretched out, vertically, which worked well for the.
There was actually a great story about this. This problem.
He
of
had a pixel
recognizing
prepared,
something.
what he had.
I met a guy at a trade show from Brazil, and he was really excited to meet me because he loved Keystone Capers. And back then, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but I think Brazil had a lot of counterfeit games. There were not a lot of U.S. shipped games. There were a lot of counterfeit games. So they had copies of cartridges, they didn't have manuals. And he told me Keystone Capers was one of the most popular games in all of Brazil. And everybody loved it. But he had a question. And I said, okay. He said, this has been debated in magazines, people talk about it. What are those things you jump over that look like radioactive rocks and they have pulsing stuff coming out of them? I said, those are radios. Because our dad collected antique radios. So I put the cathedral-style radio in with the sound waves coming off, and he rattled off 10 things that Brazil thought they were. Radios never came into the discussion. They're electronic Vandegraaff generators. They're radioactive blobs of stuff. I said, they're radios. He's like, really? They're radios? What are you going to do, huh?
It is a problem we dealt with every time.
Yep.
So that was Pitfall. Anyway, the interesting thing about Pitfall is, due to limitations in the hardware of the Atari 2600, you couldn't really scroll an image. I put scrolling in Dragster, but I did it by faking you by, I moved bushes to make it look like your car is moving, things like that. So we did screen to screen. So you run off the right side of Pitfall screen and you run onto the left side of the next screen. And that spawned hundreds and hundreds of what became called platform games. Pitfall was the first prototypical platform game. And what's cool about that is when you run off of the edge of one screen, you don't know what's going to be on the next screen. So in your mind, you could run out of the jungle, you could end up in the city, you could run out of the city, you could run onto a dock and get on a boat. Anything that you could imagine might be on the next screen over could be. Now, not in the ROM limitations we had. We were really pretty much stuck with just one little world. But that's what made, in my opinion, what made those platform games so attractive for hundreds of other versions of the game or types of game, is this imagination of what might be on the other screen.
Good surprise.
Good surprise. Does that answer Pitfall?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
This is a question specifically for Dan, because I understand you worked on this game. It's one of my favorites of all time, and I have a copy here for you to sign later today, that being Psychonauts, which, to the room, anyone heard of Psychonauts? Raise your hand. Who here has actually played it? I see less hands. That's very fascinating. But anyway, if I were to ask concerning, because I understand that Jesco came a little late in terms of publishing the game, anything that you wanted out of the game, or rather any sort of intervention you gave to the Level 5 crew concerning, between when it was in development, when they approached you for publishing? And,
well, as you know, Psychonauts was done by Double Fine and Tim Schafer, who's just an incredible designer of video games. And at the time I was working as the VP of product development. I had a little company in New Jersey called Majesco, and we were looking for products to invest in. And we were working with CAA, and at the time Tim Schafer was repped by CAA as a video game designer, and they brought Psychonauts to us, which was already in progress, and he needed funding to finish it. And we flew out to the West Coast in Tim's office in San Francisco, and we hit it off well, and it was just an incredible game. I'm sure you've all seen it, or many of you have seen it. And we worked closely with Tim on the design aspects of the last world, and really helped him and his team bring the product to completion, and then packaged it and sold it, I think, for Xbox only.
It was on PlayStation 2 as well.
Oh, it's on right. There was a version on PlayStation 2, and we were beginning to set Tim up on Psychonauts 2, the sequel, when Majesco ran into some financial difficulties, and we couldn't really support him on that game. But he was a pleasure to work with, and I can't take much credit for the design because that's all Tim Schafer. But we were there to help him, support him, and I helped produce the game with his internal crew, and it was just a real joy to work with them.
Did you have any sort of involvement with the voice crew? Because I understand Richard Horvitz was Rasputin. So.
Yes. We helped secure some of the voice talent for him, and actually out there for some of the voice recording that was done in LA. And it was, again, just a great time. And I think we had the launch party in LA at a House of Blues, which was a lot of fun.
Great.
Other games?
What would you say is the biggest technological advancement that really allowed you to kind of unleash?
Biggest technological advancement that something we did unleash?
No, that you experienced in the course of your career.
2D to 3D.
Better code bases, like what actually enabled you?
Well, we would make all these games where you'd have pre-drawn pictures that were animated, and then all of a sudden it changed from that to points in space, a polygon getting rendered by a simulation of a camera. It's like, night and day. Like you could look anywhere and go anywhere. Where the original games were you scroll this way or go screen this way or screen that way. That was like a gigantic change.
It's true, but it required some evolution.
Right.
The interesting thing is, originally all sprites were 2D. They were drawn. They're pixel artists, right? And now all of them are rendered using 3D models. Well, in between, when the console didn't have the power to do the actual rendering, you would use the 3D rendering sometimes offline to create the characters, but then they got stored as 2D sprites and used in that same way. So there was a time where it was great, it was usable, but only at the offline art side, because the consoles weren't powerful enough to actually do that.
And then there was like the fake 3D thing, like games like Zaxxon, where like it made you think
Isometric.
going across the terrain.
And there's actually a technical term, 2.5D.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's a pseudo 3D.
And I just want to mention that you mentioned the kind of the engines and things. In those days, I know John helped pioneer most of our 3D games by actually writing the 3D engine himself, which was very cool. So you didn't have Unreal, you didn't have Unity, you didn't have these tools back then. And I know John was a pioneer for us to do some of the first 3D games and actually created the 3D engines that allowed you to move through 3 dimensions in space.
Yeah, I mean,
all that hard work for nothing.
Like a year later.
Now, there's a chip that does it.
Engine that's
That's right.
way more powerful than yours, written by 10 guys, for over 2 years. Like, oh, okay, thanks.
if you go back to the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, think about what you see as a video game is a still picture until the program gets involved. So you'll have a background and you'll have some sprites and they just sit there. So in order to make it into a video game, you had to write code to move the object. In Pitfall, I would add an animation and a joystick, and if I moved the joystick to the right, I would run the animation for the guy to run and move him. That's how it, that's why something moved on this code, is because we wrote every single line of code that made something happen. There was no gravity in a video game until you wrote the gravity algorithm. There was no bouncing of a ball until...
No physics engine.
There's no physics engine, no nothing. And now, Unreal has... The physics engine is built in. The collision engine is built in. The 3D rendering is built in. So it's
Well, now
really
you can do it with AI. You can just talk to Unity and tell it what it is.
right. I mean, I'll tell a story on. I did a game called Canyon Bomber, and that was at Atari, so it was like the third game I ever made. And Atari had these two arcade games called Canyon Bomber was one and Depth Charge was the other. And I put both of them into an Atari 2600 cartridge, which I was very proud of, because I did in 2K bytes what they did in $10,000 worth of hardware in an arcade. But with Canyon Bomber, you had two ships going by, or jet planes going by, dropping bombs, and they would hit the bombs, or the blocks that are in the canyon, each one worth points. And one of the things that happened in Canyon Bomber is when you dropped a bomb and it would like undercut other bombs, the bombs on the top would fall with gravity, fall into the cracks left by the bomb, right? So I was pretty new out of college. I knew that gravity was, 32 feet per second squared at sea level on Earth, and I started with doing calculations. I'm going to do this gravity. I've got to make these things fall, these blocks. And I had pages and pages of scribbling of math and such to make this thing fall. And then I realized the Atari 2600 couldn't do any of this stuff. I mean, you can add and you can subtract. You can't even multiply, let alone divide, without taking the entire processing time of the microprocessor. So I ended up reducing that whole thing down into two instructions in the microprocessor, an AND and an OR. And basically ran it as a loop, and if there was a hole, I would AND that with the one above it to make the hole move up, and OR it with the one below it to make the block drop down, and run it as a loop, and these things would cascade and fall. So this whole thing was done in about 7 lines of code to run this in the gravity algorithm. Sorry about that. So those are the kinds of things that we had to do to make the things on the screen happen without physics engines and all that same kind of stuff. And a fun story along those lines is, if you remember in those days, for some reason Atari had this thing. There was a game select switch on the Atari 2600, right? And so Atari said, we got to use that game select switch. So what we're going to do is every cartridge has to have multiple game variations. And you would select game 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 256 in some of them. It was crazy. So I had to make a game variation. So I said, all right, here's a game variation. There's gravity and there's no gravity. So it's kind of interesting. You would drop bombs in that one and it would undercut, and then they would stay there. They wouldn't drop down, and that changes the point values of everything. It was just a nice little game variation. So they're doing a manual for Canyon Bomber. They send a couple gals over from the marketing department who are going to write the manual. So I have to show them. We used to do that every time. We're done with the game, but now we have to show it to marketing so that they can write a manual for it, right? So anyways, I'm going through this, showing how the bombs work and everything. They're taking their notes and said, this really looks really good. And I go out to game option 8 or whatever, which turns off the gravity, right? And I drop the bomb, and it goes chunk, 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 and the blocks don't fall like they did in the previous version. And both of these gals looked at me and they gasped, and they said, how did you make them stay up like that? It's
Defied physics.
Defied physics by not making the blocks
Anti-gravity.
fall. Anti-gravity. So I think at least you know that you suspended disbelief in people's minds into thinking, well, of course they're going to fall because things fall. But no, they don't. We have to make them fall. Anyway.
Dave, I'm glad you brought up that variation thing. These, space meters, 112 variations or whatever. Because there's a lot of people don't even think of using that.
Right.
And a little known fact is the Donkey Kong I did on the Atari 2600. If you used it, you could have selected a variation where all 4 levels were in. But nobody knew that.
I wish I had known that.
Yeah, I know. Jeez.
Also, the other technological change thing, though, was the size.
It's true.
Like, it's unfathomable, really. Like, the games, when he started, were 2,000 bytes of ROM, and 128 bytes of RAM. Now go look at a Xbox or a PlayStation. Like it's got like multiple processors and thousands of times the magnitude of the size of what the thing could be.
Pitfall was 4K?
Pitfall was 4K bytes.
4,096 numbers put together that make Pitfall.
Yeah, so that's all the graphics, all the sounds, the logic.
And basically, if you take the entire Atari 2600 historical library and put it all together, it's smaller than an icon on your phone.
Yeah, and then like a microprocessor and your computer keyboard is more powerful than...
Microprocessor in your microwave is more powerful than the Atari.
And why do we still make games for it?
We like to do it.
Because we're crazy.
Any other game questions?
There was a hand up over here.
Addictinggames.com, a childhood.
Yep.
Is it like, what was it like developing like flash games versus console? Was it easier? Was it more difficult? What was that? Was it more fun?
The difference between console games and web games.
Well, and you're asking that specifically because you know we were involved in Addicting Games?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know, there were a lot of other things we did that didn't get the publicity of our Atari work. In 2010, I was recruited to become the vice president of game publishing at Nickelodeon Television Viacom New Media. They owned AddictingGames.com, which is at that point the largest free game site on the internet, 25 million people a month. And it was mostly flash games. Now, before that, David and I had spent years pioneering free games on the internet, played in the browser, supported by advertising. There was another big game site called the Candy Stand, which had Candy Stand Billiards, Candy Stand Mini Golf. These are legendary games on early internet, and we did that site as well. But, I mean, in general, flash games, we did mostly Shockwave, which was a sister technology to Flash. Flash games are really fun to do because they're short and sweet. And there were a lot of games on Addicting Games that were fun as hell. They were just so ridiculously stupid or funny, or had a great play mechanic. We didn't do many games on Addicting Games. I was more responsible for running the site in terms of what content went on it. So I saw a lot of third-party people's games. What we did do, though, is Dave and I, with a big team of people, built AddictingGames.com mobile game. It came out on the iPhone, and it had 17 Addicting Games, and it ended up growing into about 30 or 40 Addicting Games. And it was #1 in the App Store for months. It was a gigantic product for Viacom. So I'm not sure if you're more focused on Addicting Games or on Flash, but we did small games, and they could be fun too.
Yeah, back up a little bit. In 1995, Gary and I founded a company called Skyworks Technologies, and what we said was, there was the video game crash in 1983, all these things, and all these big consoles are coming out. We still like small games. We like the games you can just pick up and play for a little while. So we said, we're going to treat the internet as a game console. And that's what we did, is we created these downloadable games on Shockwave. And what we realized is the skills that we had developed on the Atari 2600 of making great games in a very small amount of data, like Pitfall was only 4K bytes. That skill translated into making these Shockwave games because the internet in 1995 was a different animal than what you remember. In 1995, nobody had broadband. Everybody had at most 28.8 modem. So we decided we would never make a game bigger than like 300K bytes because it would take 3.5 minutes to download, even that. And people would lose interest before they could download a game in 3.5 minutes. We used all of our skills at making small footprint games in Shockwave. And You also may remember people were afraid to put their credit card on the internet in 1995. I mean, who would think? But you know, it was supposed to be just for browsing. We weren't even buying stuff. So we ended up creating a three-way partnership where we went to a company like Lifesavers and said, look, you're trying to reach eyeballs to talk about your Lifesavers. Don't just show us videos of Lifesavers being made in the factory. What we're going to do is we're going to make free games for you to serve to your people to get their attention. You're going to pay us for the games, and the consumer gets the game for free. So it's like a three-way partnership. Your money, our game, customer gets to play it for free, and you get access to all of these eyeballs if you want to add ads to stuff around.
It's basically a free television.
Oh,
network,
it
is
was
what
more,
it
it
was.
was more than that. Because I had to make games where like the main character was like an Oreo cookie or something. Or was the Kool-Aid man like a water skiing?
We fought that tooth and nail. And we convinced people, no, people don't want to see the Oreo necessarily as the main character. But what we learned was, if you're making a game, an adventure game, you're driving through a city or whatever, you have two choices. You can put ads on the back, you know, on billboards or whatever for bubble cola and, you know, artificial made-up names. Or you can actually go out to sponsors and say, would you like a Coke machine in the game? You know, 7-Up machine. And they would pay you to put real products into these games, and people like them better to see a real sponsor in the game than to see something fake. And so we tried to put the branding in there so that it enhanced your experience and it didn't like slap you in the face with it. So I mean, we did a lot of pioneering work in Edward gaming in the late 1990s.
Yep. Go ahead.
There was a rumor about the Coleco versus the 2600 version of Donkey Kong.
Yes.
Can you put any light to that?
100% true, completely true. Only kidding.
I mean, Gary's game option thing was a joke.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Now we can fill it in.
I had 90 days to make that cartridge. And the game, I mean, it was like a $4,000 arcade machine. And if you look at all the games that came out at the same time Donkey Kong 2600 came out, do that. It's an educational process. Take the 10 best games that came out at that point and compare them to Donkey Kong. It puts everything in perspective. You could not do a third level or a fourth level in 4K. I didn't have time to do anything more than 4K. Even if Coleco came and said, here, you got 16K, I had 90 days. I couldn't use the rest of that ROM.
Yeah, everything back then was all about finishing the game so it could be in the shelves by before Christmas.
Coleco signed the deal with Nintendo in like March. They came to me in May. Game had to be done by September. I had 90 days, and I jammed everything I could into that cartridge at the highest quality possible. Coleco never said one word about ColecoVision.
You had to get the game.
Never said one word.
You had to get it done end of July, I think.
To address the issue here is there were people who believed that that Coleco demanded of Garry that he make the Atari 2600 version be a lesser version than the one that went on the ColecoVision machine.
It's a conspiracy.
That's a conspiracy theory. And
I've told people, and they go, yeah, but you don't know that. And I say, well, I was the guy who was making it. Of course I know that.
I heard they landed on the moon, too.
Well, except for the one time. There was one time. Coleco was owned by the Greenberg brothers. And they stood behind me at a desk for 3 days while I was finishing the game. And at one point, the guy did say that I had to make the 8 look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And I had to make the barrels look like Ritz crackers. So after I did those two things, I was done with the instructions. Never happened.
And in fact, it was a commercial success, a massive commercial success.
Yeah, Coleco had 550 products in the store that year. In Wall Street speak, it's called SKUs, S-K-U. They had 550 SKUs. That's everything that had a UPC code on it, basically. And an analyst report in January of that year said that Coleco had a great year, except for the fact that they were a little too dependent on the Donkey Kong cartridge, on Atari, because out of 550 products, it represented 25% of the total revenue of the company. So believe me, last thing they wanted was bad quality.
Question right there. Then we'll come to you.
Quick, Mr. Kitchen. So you've spoken in the past about originally on the first level of Donkey Kong, you had straight. And then someone from Activision said, well, if you want to work at Activision, you'd make them crooked like that. Was that how difficult was that to accomplish, and how did you achieve the crooked playfield?
I mean, what it essentially is, any innovation on the Atari has to do with synchronizing your code to the beam of the television, which is going left to right across the screen, coming back left to right across the screen, doing that 200 and something times per frame. So the only thing you can do to work around the hardware would be to tell the system at the beginning of the scan line, I want you to display this, and then halfway through, do it again, only tell it to display something else. So you fool the machine. It was a monumental task to try to do that with the playfield, the entire screen. I knew I probably could do it, but I had to do a whole game. I didn't have time for that. But when the Activision guy came out and said, if you work for Activision, those ramps would be slanted, I kind of had it in my hip pocket that I probably could do it. And I ripped all the code apart for a weekend and put it back in. And it's a hell of a nice feature. And it took a lot of miraculous stuff to do it. And I don't think there's a lot of Atari 2600 programmers who could have done it. But I think it really helped. I wanted that first screen to feel very much like the coin-op game.
I think there's a version of the machine that somebody new had done recently, and they didn't even have it slanted.
Right, that famous 32K version done by some hacker kid over a period of 3 years. He doesn't even have
It's incredibly difficult.
Right.
I mean,
Was that rumor about that Donkey Kong was a bad translation, the name of the game?
It's
It was
true.
really supposed to be
It was King
or
Kong.
something?
The name of the game was King Kong, and they translated the word king. It was a mistake. They translated it into Donkey instead of King. That came out in the Nintendo lawsuit. The movie company that owned King Kong sued Nintendo when the arcade game came out. Said, that's a ripoff of King Kong. Look, it's an ape and there's a blonde girl. Nintendo won that case.
You had a question?
Yeah, actually, maybe a little off that. The early days of Activision, you already said that you had time to get things done the way you wanted to do it. And I know you were pushing the envelope of what the hardware could do at the time. What other must-haves did you have in your game? I mean, the flickering is one example, right? A lot of games flicker, games can seem to flicker. What else did you say when we're building Activision games that we've got to have that nobody else does?
We were taught by the masters at Activision. For instance, colors. If you look at an Activision game or an Atari game, our colors are so much better. And Dave and the team.
Color tables.
Color tables. Our the colors we use, the yellow we
color
use,
selections.
the red we use, the green we use. And Dave and his crew had just determined that these are some colors you don't use that look like an Atari game, but use all these bright palettes. Dave, there were other ones that...
Well, one of the most brilliant ones I thought was, you look at all the Atari games, and there are these goddamn black lines on the left edge of the screen that are moving around randomly, and it looks ridiculous. And it was so brilliant for them to say, when the day they founded the company, we are going to have that black line in every line so it doesn't look like a bug. And I think that's such a brilliant innovation. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, philosophically, the base philosophy for our entire careers was figuring out a way to make the Atari 2600 do something that it wasn't intended to do by its designer. The first experience I had, I was at Atari, and I was creating what became the 6-digit score. You'll see it in every game since I created it, so that instead of just 2 digits of score, which is what the Atari was intended to, it would have 6 full digits of score at the top, and we would use them.
Rounded corners.
With rounded corners.
Playfield.
That's right.
Yeah.
And anyway, I had that up on the screen because I had just developed it, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned around. It was Jay Miner, who was the designer of the video chip on the Atari 2600. And he was just shaking his head, and he said, I didn't know my chip could do that. And so many times we did things that the designers had no idea that through some fluke or some just trick that we could figure out how to use that hardware, we were able to do something that it was never intended, which is why the 2600 lived for over 10 years in a market where a game console didn't last for more than 2 years.
And a couple of modern examples of this same thing is we constantly push the envelope for each other. I mean, look at the locomotive in Casey's Gold on the first screen. You've never seen anything like that on Atari. And look at the snake in Circus Convoy that literally isn't a static image. It moves and it strikes at you while you walk by it. And those are things that just had no business running on that machine, but we had to push the bar really far.
Yeah, even today we're still pushing the limit of what the Atari can do, and the fact that we had bigger ROMs help. Currently our games...
And more than 2 months to make it.
And more than 3 months or 90 days to make it. Pitfall was 4K. All of our games are 128K, which is 32 times the size of Pitfall, and we fill them with gameplay and screens and mini games, and we push the limit.
That's the follow-up on that point. The new cartridges, they're just ROMs or EPROMs or whatever you're using. You don't have any other hardware.
No other hardware. No.
We wouldn't do that.
Okay.
In fact, we wouldn't have done 4K, anything more than 4 or 8K, except we had no choice. Those other ROMs aren't manufactured. We wanted to be on a level playing field with the games we did in the late 70s, early 80s. But the one...
Well, then the RAM is the real hardware.
Yeah, and we didn't... Everybody has said to me at this show, you guys added RAM. You don't still have 128 bytes.
Yeah, because even back in the old days, companies added RAM.
Yeah, but we didn't. We didn't want any of those artificial boosts. We're doing it with plain old, craziness.
Now, to be clear, we have 128 kbytes, but it's actually 32 4K bytes. Everything has to be in 4K bytes in that microprocessor. So really what we're doing is we're putting multiple cartridges, multiple 4K cartridges in. Nothing is bigger than 4K. No single bank is bigger
at a time.
And it's not easy to do that.
No.
It's really inefficient, but it's better than not having it.
What's that you notice?
I noticed that's really difficult to do.
So John was just sitting at home bored when Garry gave him a call.
Playing a lot of golf.
And said, so this is what we're doing. We're making brand new games for the Atari 2600. His first question was, well, why in heck would you do that? And then, what are you doing, John? He said, well, I'm actually kind of bored. So, we talked him into doing it again.
A couple more questions. We'll take this one up front.
Based on your life careers here, I was hoping to maybe get a response from you guys on different publishers and ones that you thought were your favorite or your best, and which ones gave you the best experiences.
I think Activision gave us all the best experience. It was a magical time back then.
Early Activision.
Early Activision.
Nothing wrong with the new Activision, but it's a different company,
So that was
You favored that over a company you owned and founded?
Well, I didn't answer the question.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
I mean, Audacity is certainly...
Audacity Games is our favorite publisher. Well, we had a hell of a good time in the 1980s.
We did.
Back then, the games that you were all making, there seemed to be... there was a Three Little Pigs game, there was a chicken game, there was a spider going up the buildings game, eyeball game. Where did all of that... There was all this wacky creativity...
I'm terrified of spiders.
...in the games.
And that's why I did that.
But then at some point in time, all of that wacky imagination seemed to go away?
Well, you know, that's a good kind of a segue from the old Activision to the new Activision. The new Activision gets a bad reputation for a number of reasons, but you understand they're doing AAA games that have $100 million budgets. And so if you like those kinds of games, you really want Activision to keep doing those, because there has to be a company big enough.
But another thing happened back then about what he's talking about, where all of a sudden it was like they didn't want to take risk on some wacky idea. They wanted to license something. So like, oh yeah, I can talk Toys R Us into buying more of them if it says it's...
Right, if it says it's Kool-Aid Man, yeah. Toys R Us will buy it instead of an original
or
game.
a movie or whatever. So like the more original games...
But it all does
get less funded.
But it all does come down to budget.
Yeah,
in other words, if you're going to make a $100 million game, you're going to go to investors and you're going to say, give me $100 million. And they say, what am I giving it to you for? And that's why, well, it's Call of Duty 7. You know what Call of Duty is. You know it sells well. Give us $100 million and we'll make a sequel to that. You get a lot less unique, original, creative ideas. Those now come from indie studios.
Right, and Call of Duty was an original idea, but I think you're probably talking about a time when the retailers called more of the shots and the publishers were concerned about risk. And so it was a time that licensed games became more prevalent, and you didn't have the creativity of creating your own character and your own world.
There's a great movie called The Player. Tim Robbins stars in it, and he goes in and he pitches a movie idea. It's just like Call of Duty meets Driving Miss Daisy. And that's what's happening in the game industry. You got to tie in some other bull crap to get somebody to put $100 million up.
Somebody had a question. They were speaking before.
30 seconds.
Somebody had a question up there. They started to speak. Was it you with the hand up?
Yeah, that was me. I was up there, and I was walking downstairs to get your attention. I was upstairs.
Oh, trying to get us to stop?
Yeah. Okay. Here's what I was gonna ask though. I know you guys worked on Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision, but have you ever worked on any like first generation consoles like the Magnavox Odyssey or like
yes.
The Telstar?
All of them.
You worked on first generation consoles too?
Well, no, the Magnavox Odyssey was not cartridge programmable exactly.
No,
and
he did before video games, because he did the games where it was a bunch of LED lights on a handheld device. That's what the display was.
Right.
Harry made them.
Those predated video games.
By the way, you may all stop by our booth at any time and ask any questions you have that we didn't answer here, and come take a look at our selection of brand new Atari games.
And we will sign anything you have of ours, and we won't charge you for an autograph.
Thank you very much.